Welcome to Make and Decorate, a podcast for makers who love to sew, quilt, knit, and decorate. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I did not post an episode on Thanksgiving, but I am sure you all were busy with your loved ones and keeping up with Black Friday, Small Business Saturday, and Cyber Monday. Today's episode makes up for that with a super long chat with my guest, Naomi Fata of Love Stitches. We chat about sewing clothing, simple clothing alterations, and making slipcovers. So, onward to the first segment, which is Chit Chat. Thanksgiving was nice and low key around here, just the way I like it. Lots of football, food, and sewing, of course. I did not overdo our Thanksgiving menu, but I did make the most delicious turkey roulade. I've talked about this in previous Thanksgiving episodes, and I will put a link to the Ina Garten recipe that I have made this recipe several times in the past, but I never bought the Calvados brandy that the recipe calls for, and until this year. It really made a difference. It is so good. And if you don't already know, Calvados is a French apple brandy, and it's a alcohol that is fermented fruit versus whiskey or scotch are from fermented rye, or I think wheat is the other one. But anyway, it's good. It's great. I actually do prefer brandy, I think, because I like the fruitiness of it. And it like warms you up, especially in wintertime. Anyway, it goes into the stuffing, which is what is rolled up into the turkey breast before it bakes. So think of a sponge cake roll with frosting rolled up in it, or fruit, or whatever the filling is, like a Swiss cake roll. It's the same thing, only with turkey and stuffing. And it's not that the turkey rolls up into a nice spiral per se, but it is rolled at least into thirds, which sort of makes that spiral look with the stuffing inside of it. So yeah, that was really delicious. And of course, Chicago Bears football is like, we're almost to the end of the season, and it cannot come soon enough for me because the football team, the Bears football team, is seriously disappointing again this season. There are like rare few moments of brilliance, plays that are great, but not enough to win most games. We have like the worst record. We're actually not the very last anymore of all the 32 teams. So I guess that's a good thing. I've enjoyed watching a couple of other teams that I do like. However, I will always remain a Chicago Bears fan, and grew up here, and that's my team. So I guess, I don't know, for better and worse, it's the Chicago Bears for me. But Kansas City, I really like. And Dallas Cowboys are doing well this year, too. Taylor Swift has brought a lot of attention to the Kansas City Chiefs because she's been attending a lot of games, and her boyfriend is a player on the Kansas City Chiefs. So the media has just totally exploited this into a frenzy. And I think by now, pretty much everyone is over it. But that might just be me, but I think that we are. So, media, you can just go back to normal. There's not a whole lot to update you on sewing and knitting. It's pretty much the same thing, working through the table linen commission project, which is almost done. It needs to get done. I'm going to be working a lot this weekend on it. Still knitting the prison blanket. And the, I guess, newest thing is that last week I had my two nieces over for a long weekend, a long sewing weekend. So the older is now 15 years old. Oh my gosh, I can't even believe it. These kids grow so fast. I taught her how to sew on a sewing machine when she was, well, I started to teach her when she was 5, and now she's 15. So her little sister is 7, and that's a great age, I think, for a kid to learn, although all kids are different. But when the older one was 5, she, there was very limited things you can do on a sewing machine by yourself. But now the 7-year-old can be very independent on the sewing machine. She grasps the knowledge quickly and can reach the pedal and can guide the fabric through. That was the first time that she used a sewing machine, was this past weekend, and it was very exciting. We had a great time, and she is very um, like me in that she loves to make everything. She's a crafter and loves to hand sew. And now learning the sewing machine was very exciting for her. We made a pair of pajama pants. They look great. And she was very proud and happy about those, as she should be. And in the downtime when I was working with her sister, who was making an apron, we were making the Helen's Closet apron pattern. It is the York expansion pack for the York pinafore. And it's a very nice looking apron. However, there is double folds bias binding around the entire apron. And it's not a standard style of apron, but I almost think it's so much better than the normal regular styles of aprons where that strap that goes behind your neck sort of seems to pull a lot while you're using it. And this one just goes over your head, almost like a sleeveless dress, but I'll put a link to the Helen's Closet link to that, but it's really pretty. We did not get that done. It's almost done. So that was a really fun weekend with the girls. It was a nice sort of unplugging for me away from work and even like just taking a break from the commission projects with the sewing. So that was really enjoyable. I don't know about you, but I like to buy myself a Christmas gift that is sewing, crafting related. And this year, I got a beautiful pair of scissors, fabric scissors from Brooklyn Haberdashery. I'm on their email list, and they had a Black Friday or it was a Cyber Monday, one of those 2 days where it was a 1 day only thing. So you have to make up your mind quickly. And I think they also do this because it's very easy to impulse buy when there's a time limit like that on it. And it's by the maker Kohana. So I've purchased Kohana before. Those really tiny scissors that I have gotten in the past and talked about, those are made by Kohana. It's a Japanese company that really makes gorgeous sewing tools and accessories and by hand. So they had these scissors that had 3 different colors that you could choose from on the handles, where they were this resin that was I don't know, hand done, hand dipped, somehow handmade, and very lustrous and beautiful. Plus, the scissors themselves are supposed to be excellent quality. And I did it because it was a huge, deep discount. And whereas at the normal regular price, I probably would not have gotten these at all. So I just got them and I haven't used them yet, but I just wanted to mention it. And if you are not already on their email list, I would try Brooklyn Haberdashery if you like hand sewing, hand embroidery, um, mending. They have just a more niche, I guess, product um, that they carry. A lot of it is Japanese tools and fabrics, but they also have waxed linen thread and kits. So I really love that shop. And when I actually do get a chance to use the scissors, I will let you know. I did open the box up really right away, and they are just very beautiful, and they come with a sheath that has a pretty tassel on it. So so far, I'm really very excited and pleased about that purchase for myself. And am wondering if you guys do the same thing, or if not, think about it and, let me know. I'd love to hear what people buy for themselves as a treat for their craft, knitting, sewing, or whatever. All right. So I'm not going to take any more time with chit chats so that we can get on to my conversation with Naomi Fata. But before I start there, I'm going to do something a little different and add a little music in between these two segments. You can enjoy and listen to it. Today I've picked a holiday song, but or you could just fast forward directly to our conversation. Otherwise, whatever you choose, please enjoy. And after this episode, I have got one more episode left for the first half of season 6. Naomi Fata has a sewing based business where she does bridal gown and formal wear alterations. She makes custom fitted slip covers and teaches alterations via online and in person classes. And she has recently started her own YouTube channel with some tutorials. Hello and welcome to the Make and Decorate podcast, Naomi.
Hi, Stephanie. Thanks so much for having me. What a pleasure to be here.
Yes, I'm so excited to chat with you about garment sewing, alterations, and all that kind of stuff because I think it's very intimidating to a lot of people who sew and even like people who quilt that could definitely hop over to the alteration side, tend to shy away from it just because maybe like it's just not a straight line sewing or whatever. But anyway, we're going to talk all about that. So I'm very excited. And you're located in New York, right?
Yep. So I'm about 2 hours north of New York City. That's usually how people identify where we are. And we're straight up, if you're familiar with New York at all, straight up the Hudson River.
Oh,
So,
nice.
yeah, so
Okay.
I'm actually like my town is right on the river, but I'm probably 6, 7 miles from the river, but we live close to
Oh,
the
that's
Hudson.
nice.
Hmm.
I I like that northeast coast area. It's very, I don't know another word to say, but bucolic. It's like all the beautiful rolling
Yes.
hills and the trees and a lot of we were in Vermont, which is right next to New York.
Yes.
A lot of gorgeous, just like creeks and streams everywhere. It was just
Yes.
so really very pretty.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, it's very picturesque. We have cousins that live out in New York,
Okay.
a little bit further, I think a little further north than you, because they are right next to Vermont.
I think I'm less than 2 hours from the border, probably even less than that.
It's very nice. You're around a lot of different states
Yes. Yeah.
within
Yeah.
driving
We have
distance, I'm sure.
Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Vermont are very close. Yeah.
Yeah, very pretty places too, all of those. All right, so let's learn about you and your story and just start when did you start sewing?
I was quite young. So my mom, not crazy young, but my mom was the oldest of 12. And so when I was a child, many of her siblings were getting married. And I just remember getting the dress fabric and the pattern in the mail for like the flower girl dresses. And that's my first introduction to kind of wanting to learn to sew. We always had a sewing machine in the house. Like my mom knew how to sew. I mean, she didn't sew a lot. She was a nurse by trade, but it was always there. It was always available. It wasn't like it was something that was a foreign object. And so it was my first
Mhm.
introduction to sewing. And just after that, I just wanted, like at Easter, I'd want to make a dress, or school holidays, I'd want to make something. And I got into doing like a braided rag rug from just like a big garbage bag of old t-shirts. I just remember cutting them up and wanting to do that. And I was probably about 11 when I wanted to make a quilt. And it was totally my own pattern. And it was just kind of like these geometric shapes. But my grandmother just let me take a bag of old shirts from my grandfather's closet and turn them into a quilt. And so it's just one of those things. I just picked it up and kept going with it.
Wow, that's really interesting. And the fact that you really, well, when you're that young, you really don't have that fear yet of making mistakes. So it's good that you started as young as you did, I think. Did you kind of feel that? Like you weren't really afraid to make a mistake when you were, like, let's say, making that quilt for the first time?
Um, well, that's an interesting. I guess I would say that huh, Did I have a fear of making a mistake? I think I didn't have any rules to follow. So,
Or
like,
not even making a mistake, but
yeah,
perfection, like
yes.
shooting for
So it was like
perfection.
I felt like I could just think of an idea and do it. And there was no like
Mhm,
wrong way to do it. And there was nobody like
mhm.
judging me, or there was nobody like
Right.
anything else.
So
And
that's
so then,
exactly what I mean. Like, to me, that's kind of like, you don't have that, fear of doing something wrong. You just
right.
thought it up and you
Yes.
tried it.
Yes.
So that's really great. Um,
Yeah.
and so you started off, you sewed dresses and clothes, and then you
Yes.
wanted to do the rug and the I love it.
Yeah.
I love it
Yeah.
because I always like to do everything too.
Yeah.
All right. So when you were at your formative beginning sewing years, has anything changed about what you like about sewing, or is it pretty much kind of been the same as you've kind of been sewing over the years?
I think that now, looking back at it, I find sewing to be like very therapeutic. And even like when I'm sewing for clients, I will just like to go and just sew and kind of close out the world for a couple of hours and listen to a
Mm,
podcast and just have my mental space. And so I think that that's amazing. I think growing up, so the alterations part was not something at all in my radar when I was sewing
mm,
as like during my formative years. It was more
mhm.
of thinking, well, what new things can I make? Though I do like to backtrack that just slightly because my grandmother tells the story of like I went to TJ Maxx or something. I think she took me school shopping and it was a bodysuit and I didn't like the bodysuit. You know when they used to snap down down underneath.
Yes.
So I turned it
Mhm.
into a shirt. So that was probably my first like actual alteration
Ah,
because so there was some connection of turning clothing into something that you like better, but it was very much let's go to the store and buy fabric and a pattern.
yeah, for me too.
Yeah.
Yeah, back when I was a kid.
Mhm.
And it really was just, that's what you did. You just went to the local fabric store, looked through all the big 4
Yes,
patterns, and
yes,
got the fabric at the same store.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
for the project.
Yep.
So very different back then, and, still fun though. I mean, I loved going
Oh,
to the fabric
me
stores.
too. And I loved looking through those big pattern books.
One thing that I did, this is such an '80s thing, but, the at the time, it was pretty popular to make your own, like, photo album book with, the quilt, batting, and you cover it up with the fabric, and you cover the whole
Oh,
album. So
yes.
it's like a
Yes.
puffy cover. And then I and then you make your own little picture frame in the front, like maybe an oval, and then put little pearls around it or trim, and yeah, and that lame fabric was in, so I remember making one of those. It was like this lame shiny
Yes.
with all the
Yes.
trims with the hot glue gun.
Oh, that's too funny. But yeah, I've seen so many of those. Hmm.
But it was like, trip
Yes.
to the fabric store. I gotta make my puffy fabric photo album.
So fun.
Oh, those were the days. Yeah, yeah. So, okay, I'd ask a lot of guests this, but what types of sewing machines do you use? For instance, mechanical or high-tech electronic ones, vintage. Everybody's got their different preferences, so I always love to find out what that is.
My main machine that I use is an industrial juki. And so it's got a motor, it's got an oil pan underneath it, and so it has its own
Nice.
table. And that
Yeah.
one is for the speed. So
Mhm.
it only does forward and backward. There's no zigzag
Mhm.
or anything like that. But you can change all of like the pressure feet. So that's my baby, so to speak. And I would say I probably do about 80% of my sewing on that because so much of it
Mhm.
is, straight
Straight
stitching.
stitch. Yeah.
And then I don't have an actual cover stitch machine. I had bought a serger back when I started as a business. So it was like 2007, 2008 was when I bought it.
Hmm.
And like looking back, I probably would have bought a 5 thread, but I wasn't really like thinking about it. And I bought a 4 thread, and it's worked well for me. And that one's like a Husqvarna, and
Hmm.
it's
Okay.
it's what the stores were carrying. Like I went to a sewing machine shop and bought that one. What?
That was my first serger. Was my
Okay.
mom got it for me. It was a husky lock.
That's fine.
Uh,
Yep.
and I think was not a five. It was a 4 thread, but produced really good
Yeah.
overlock stitches.
Yeah. And I mean, I think I've only had it repaired like once, and then I kind of learned
Hmm.
how to take it not the whole thing, but the majority of it apart myself to be able
Wow.
to clean it and oil it.
Hmm.
And I kind of learned the reason that it broke the first time was I was trying to do overlock on a slipcover that was too fat. So I was so I
Oh.
burnt it out.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. Yeah. I was working it just a little too hard.
Too hard. Yeah.
Yes.
Because it's probably not. I mean, there are industrial
There
serger
are.
machines, walking foot machine,
Mhm.
blind hem foot.
Yes.
And I visit my work rooms. I just love it because I just see like these. They're usually the workrooms. They kind of have this sort of layout, and like it might be along one wall, but it's like so they can, I guess, move from one machine to the next. They're all kind of like lined up. So they
Yes.
go from like their straight stitch to their blind stitch to
Yes.
their
Yes.
walking foot.
Yes. Yeah, I love going places and seeing all of them too. And like
Hmm.
sometimes I'll like putz around and look at like, oh, should I think about getting a machine like this or that? And sometimes it boils down to like room or practicality or
Right.
whatnot
They take
because
up a lot of space.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
And and then my third machine that I use a bit is it's not that old, but it's computerized. It also has a push to start feature, but it's a necky. Um,
Hmm.
and that one has a stitch that's actually very similar to a cover stitch, but it's only like the machine only has a top thread and a bobbin. And then it also
Hmm.
has like some, plenty of other like decorative stitches or
Mm.
stretch stitches, etc. So,
Mm, yeah.
but that,
And does it use that one needle that has breaks off into two for the cover stitch?
you know, I have to say, a lot of people like that. I do not. I'm not a fan of the twin needle.
I don't either
So I
because
thought
it puckers
it's just
the
me.
fabric, right?
I've tried it over and over, and I'm just like, I just don't love it. So it has the potential to do that, but no, there's a
Mhm.
stitch where it's not an exact cover stitch, so it actually
Oh, I
crosses
see.
over, but it makes it look like that. But you can hem t-shirts
Oh,
on it
nice.
really
Yeah.
nicely, and I think
Mhm.
it looks very like professional and clean.
Mhm.
So I've kind of stuck with
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Well, and it's funny because I love watching these YouTube videos of, Japan has a lot of them and some Korea, and, one of them's, like, called The Process or something, and they show the process of something being made, and there was one in Japan about, the process of these blue jeans being made, and it's, like,
Okay.
some famous place in Japan, Betty Smith, I think was the name of it. First, well, a side note, they have a very scary looking logo, by the way. Betty, their logo, has got like this clown red hair and like big. I don't know. I'm very afraid of clowns. And when I first saw it, I was like, whoa, that's a little scary, that logo. But anyway, that's a side note. But the point of it is that they did not cover stitch, but they did make it look like a cover stitch, but they did it manually, one row, and then they went back and did the second row, and how they got it so straight and even was just pretty amazing to watch.
Yeah.
So, I mean, not even some of the professional workrooms even, use that. They kind of, I think maybe for speed, I don't know what, but they can do it all on that one straight stitch machine.
Well, yeah. I know it's
Yeah.
interesting to watch everybody's processes. And I think it's always true, like, not everyone does it the same, and that's okay. Like everybody kind of finds what works for them. Actually, I've been trying to do a couple new techniques myself recently, and I'm like, I don't know. I might just go back to the way that I was doing something. Like I've been trying different techniques with the rolled hem because I just had
Oh,
seen
okay.
different people start to do it differently. I was like, well, maybe that would speed up my process because I do a lot of like rolled hems for bridal work and prom dresses, and so it's on like thin fabric, chiffon, and all of that. And I know I might just go back to
Hmm.
my own method.
Yeah, because there's always so many different ways to do like a similar thing. You mentioned, I think you started your alteration business at around 2007 or 8.
Yes. So it was a very slow start, meaning it was just kind of, I had just gotten married. I had made my own wedding gown and I had seen someone else do this business from home. And so I had this idea of, oh, like eventually I'll probably have kids and I'll want to work from home. And so that's kind of like what spurred it on to start. So then my adopted dad, who was like a mentor to me, he knew I had this idea, so he printed me business cards, named the business, and handed them to me. And that was that was my start. So
Oh, that's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
Hmm.
So I didn't really know what I was gonna encounter as I started a business, meaning like it was kind of like you just put yourself out there, and I had no concept of what type of work people would bring to me. In fact, in my mind, I anticipated making dresses from scratch for people or something like that. And that wasn't really what people asked for. So that's kind of how I got started into alterations. Was it was just that's what people were requesting, and so I just kept taking what they asked for and just learning how to do it. So
Wow.
yeah, sometimes I look back and I'm like, what? So it was like my husband and my dad, and they were like, they would just start handing out business cards, and then I would just start saying, yes, sure, I'll do it. And like in the back of my mind, I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I have no idea. Um, but at that point, it certainly wasn't like I was still working full time. It wasn't like, I need to make this work right now or else
Hmm.
like I
So
need
you
to
had some
make a
time
certain amount of money. Yeah.
to make it work,
Yes. Yeah.
as Tim Gunn would
Yeah.
say.
Like a good 5 years of like,
Hmm.
doing it at my own pace.
Hmm.
Definitely.
Wow, that is pretty cool. I just I I don't have that, I think, where I could just figure out alterations. I think the more that I sew though, so I think that may be the key is if you have sewn for a while, you start your brain starts to work in that way of being able to figure out the seams and how they
Yes.
behave.
Yes.
Yeah, and uh, alterations is something that I think is a very useful skill for anyone to have, because ready-made never fits right. I
Right.
don't think. I mean,
Right.
I don't know. If you have that the model that the manufacturer makes the clothes based on, then fine, they'll fit you right. But for everybody else's body shapes
Right.
are not going to
Right.
fit. It'd either be too big up here or you know down below. And so I remember somebody I saw on TV and it stayed with me, but it was like a fashion sort of thing, and they said like, you know, you don't have to get the most expensive clothes at all, but make sure that whatever you buy like is altered to fit you,
Yes.
and then that makes all the difference in the world.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so kind of like stayed with me, and it's just like, yeah, when I don't like something that is ready made that I see, it's because it's just not fitting right. It's, something's wrong. So, yeah, so alterations. So that's interesting. You sort of are self-taught on that. And did you ever have anybody upset with what you did as far as
Um,
alterations?
so I definitely made my fair share of mistakes at the beginning. I'm trying to think. It was more like it. I feel like I didn't have a precise blind hem at the beginning. Those type of things where like your skills are still like you're working on them. And I mean, it's not like we're ever completely perfect. We're always like working to better ourselves. Um, I mean, looking back, I think at like my first jacket zipper that I put in for someone, I'm like, why on earth did they pay me for that? But and obviously like my prices were way way lower than they are now, that kind of thing. But it was also like this element of you just like work at it until you figure out how to make it
Mhm.
well. And
Yes.
then like I did do, I mean, I picked up like knacks from like Threads magazine, or I
Mhm.
would find like tailoring books at garage sales. I feel like YouTube
Mhm.
was not nearly the thing then.
Yeah, at
I
that
mean,
point,
I
yeah.
think it was just launched maybe in 2008, but I didn't really get into it. And so there wasn't like training out there really.
Mhm.
Didn't really know anyone that did that. And the pattern review did some classes.
Mhm.
And I think I went to like a couple of day seminars here and there that might have been affiliated with the American Sewing Guild,
Mhm.
those kind of things. So I like tried to do what I could to definitely to, and then you just keep learning as you go. And I think especially because I started off without the pressure of having to make it something, then it was like I could take projects as they came and just kind of tackle them, take them apart. And I definitely think I enjoy the problem solving part of the brain of like, okay, so like thinking through how to take something apart and put it back together again. So even now, if I get like a project that I'm like, I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with that or how I'm going to go around this corner, maybe for a slipcover, what can I do to, so I'll like, it's almost like a puzzle piece in my brain that I'll just mull over for a couple of days until it kind of solidifies. And I'm like, oh, okay, that, makes sense. And I kind of have that conversation with myself. So I think I
Yeah.
definitely have that like brain that I really enjoy that.
What made you want to go toward to doing the slip covers? Because that's a kind of a specific, uh, kind of area.
Um, well, my husband told somebody I could do it, and I had a chair land in my sewing room.
Ah, your husband. That's too funny.
So it was not intentional whatsoever.
Wow.
um, so I mean, that is also, I would say, that almost the benefit of living in a small town is that there's not, number one, there's not a ton of people doing the work. Like, there's
Mhm.
not the competition. And so then also, like, it was somebody my husband had known for years, and it was something they couldn't find anyone else to do. And
Mhm.
so there weren't any high stakes in the game.
Yeah, custom slip covers, it's a very unique field, and a lot of even, like, drapery workrooms don't make slip covers. Upholsterers may, but they don't even really like to do that, so, it's hard to find a slipcover person that can make those slipcover because you do fitted slipcovers, which are what you really want.
Yeah.
You don't want,
Yeah.
like, just, like, the big piece of fabric tucking in everywhere.
Right.
So you're
Right.
really, like, making these couture pieces for the
Yeah.
furniture.
I almost always have a running wait list
Mm.
for people.
'Cause it really can extend the life of their upholstery. A slipcover can, or it can totally change the look. which is a nice thing too, without having to invest in a whole new sofa or chair.
Just last week, I dropped off one. It was for a sleeper sofa, and they had purchased the couch about 20 years ago, and it was one of those pieces that was made with a slipcover on it, meaning, you
Mm,
know how, like, I'm sure you know those
yep.
pieces that they're not made to be displayed without a slipcover.
Right. Yeah, there's just muslin underneath.
Yes,
Mhm.
exactly. And so the previous cover had lasted the 20 years, and it was actually not in that much disrepair, but they wanted a new look. So it was
Mhm.
like a maroon, and they were switching to a navy, but they also had cats. And so over time, slip covers, a cat and the claws can kind of pick at the cover a little bit,
Mhm.
but the cover can also be a way of like protecting the piece from damage from a
Sure.
cat.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I get a lot of clients that have pets that ask for slip covers.
Yeah, and then they can just switch it out in another, like, 3 to 5 years for another slip cover. You're right, it would protect it, from that. And fabric, I mean, it does break down over time, so, if it lasts 20 years, that's pretty good.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, definitely.
Right. Back to alterations. You do a lot of bridal and formal wear, and, this is also something that you just sort of built up your skills to do?
I didn't focus on bridal and formal wear that much until about 2 years ago.
Oh, okay.
In fact, it was kind of like I had done them, and I've always done like lots of prom, and I've done a decent amount of bridal, but I hadn't really advertised for it. I was connected, well, during the pandemic, and then we ended up moving. And so everybody's in this whole, transition phase. And so
Mhm.
for me, it was kind of like, I was like, well, what exactly am I going to do with the business? So this is like the backstory leading up to
Sure.
the transition.
Yeah.
And so I had always taken like everybody, like all sorts of alterations. And it was really sucking time. And not that I don't love that, like, because I love seeing people and all of that.
Mhm.
But we moved from like living kind of in a village into moving more the outskirts, really only like a 5 mile move, but not the central location, more into like a private community, a quieter community. And so just like figuring out, well, do I want the foot traffic? It was really draining, I
Mhm.
think, by the end, but I didn't really realize it, like how much people would just drop by. It's a drain, it's a time suck. I'm always answering my phone. So there was that aspect of it. And then there was a or a bridal seamstress membership community that started in Connecticut. The founder started it in Connecticut. And she had reached out to me via like Instagram because she saw some stuff on Instagram. So it's Stitch Collective. And then I just joined in with all these other bridal seamstresses. And then I think I feel like I had the confidence to be like, oh, if I had a question and I had something that I couldn't figure out, I have somebody that I could ask. So we do like monthly meetings. It's actually twice a month, and like via Zoom trainings for like cost or how to talk to brides and all like a whole gamut of things. So that's been really, really helpful for me in making that transition, knowing that there's people that are doing it that I could ask if I need
Sure.
help or want advice on like a different bustle position. I would say maybe it is the whole personality thing as far as like I'd always tackled the bridal. I just like, and you just learn to take something apart and put it back together again. And even in a wedding gown, like the seams are still the same. So if you have the basic knowledge of, say, a lot of it might be princess seams. Um, there's the added effect of like boning, or there's a lot of mesh material in there. So it is all very fine handiwork, especially if you're having to pick out stitches. So just, being very careful, like all of that. But it was definitely a skill that learned over time and slowly getting into it over the last, 10 to 15 years. It wasn't something where I felt like a high pressure up at, at that point. And so now, as I kind of moved into focusing on that more, there wasn't that pressure there either.
That is such a great resource that actually reached out to you.
Yes, definitely. I think it was like as they were just beginning to form the community, um, contacting, people that were interested in joining. And it's been really amazing because I've realized, especially as a home based business sewer, um, thinking, oh, well, am I the only one that does this? And of course, the beauty of the internet and the number of like bridal seamstresses or alteration seamstresses that are like they like working from their home. They like having a home office and having that flexibility. And like, it's not, a good portion of the group have a storefront and a good portion of us don't. And we're all okay with that. Like for me, I've kind of been like, maybe in 10 years, but I don't know. I definitely love the flexibility of not having to have a storefront.
Yeah.
Um,
There's a lot that comes with a storefront.
yeah.
It's good. I think you're right. It's nice that you are able to do that from your home, and I think the bridal and the formal wear too is a nice opportunity because it's a bit more lucrative, and you're making more complex changes and alterations, and you're working with fabrics that if you if you take the stitches out, uh, it'll show the needle holes, so you kind of have to like get it right the
Yes.
first time.
Yes.
And I'm sure that there's a ton of just like hand work, like you said earlier, to it, um, than there would be just like, hemming a pair of pants you could do on the machine.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for dresses that have, say, lace overlays in them, often you have to like lift up the lace overlay and any sort of beadwork that's sewn on top of it, and like lift that up to get to the seam, alter the seam, and then hand stitch that all back down. So that, yes, so then that's a lot of fine, like
Yeah.
needlework.
Yes.
Definitely.
That's something that I think I would like to venture into, and I like to do everything, but it's just that would be too stressful for me, I think. It's nice because you
Well,
you have the more adventurous spirit, um, and you did learn a bit more, like you said, from that one group, and which is a good
yeah,
resource, so that kinda can give you more
yeah,
confidence.
yes. Yeah, I mean, they do say like if you really wanted to learn, you could like buy a wedding dress at Goodwill and just start taking it apart. Just there's no pressure, there's no stakes involved.
Oh, that's a good thought, actually, yeah. I've just seen videos of people taking up part, like, if they have to make something beaded smaller, you have to, like, do the little hammer on the beads to, I don't know, break them apart or
Uh,
something. It
So,
that could have been just them being a little bit melodramatic with the little hammer, but
no, I do know some people do use a hammer. I tend not. For the most part,
Mhm.
I haven't found that method to be. It's we all
It's
have
a
our
little
own
scary.
methods. So
Yeah.
I've tried it before.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, part of it is because especially if you're hemming a dress, and I haven't run into this so much with actual wedding gowns, but more with like formal wear. I've had a lot of like mother of the bride dresses or like black tie event dresses where they have sequins that are going straight down vertically. And so in order to hem it, and they're embedded in like a tool. And so in order to hem it, you're taking off like 3 to 4 inches at the bottom, which means that you're also going to be cutting across that line of beads. And if you just, you know, cut it and don't secure the end of the beads, then every single
It's
line.
gonna fall. Oh my gosh. Oh, it sounds like a nightmare.
Yes, yes, you have that right. um, so no, you just learn. Okay, so like my method is I like to just measure up. I'll know where I am going, and I secure at the end of the beat, like the last bead, and go up,
Mhm.
and then I'll like take the remaining ones off. So like everybody gets their different method,
Mhm.
but that's what I like to do is like I'll knot it and secure, and then
Mm.
go over and then go
That
around.
sounds
So,
good. Yeah.
yeah.
All right. So you are also uh, putting up tutorials on your website and have some online classes. Started your YouTube channel. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about um, alterations for us, regular muggle people. And just like, where do we start? What type of alterations do you recommend for beginners? And are there, well, let's start with that one. And because I have another whole, that's a different like branch of the topic. So let's start with where we should start.
Yeah, so I think this is always such an interesting question is where to start. Like, start with something you have, like something you have that you're like, oh, it doesn't fit quite right. What could I do to it? I mean, shortening a pair of pants is like really basic.
Hmm.
And you think if you sew anything, whether you quilt or whether you are a pattern sewer, it's just a straight line.
Hmm.
And so I know having jeans is one thing that kind of um, stumps people a little
Hmm.
bit, I think, because there is the bulk of the jean, like, so especially when you're going over the side seam
Hmm.
where there's that, double stitching. And like, so if you were to shorten them, your machine can kind of act up. And so, like, learning how to go over that
Hmm.
without a lot of trouble is something that,
That's where you can use a hammer.
yeah.
Flatten out.
I don't know. You might break your machine. You do that part. Well, good point. Good point.
Well, that's where I started, is just hemming things, hemming
Yeah.
pants. And then I did learn how I still remember, I will never forget, but when I learned how to hem jeans where they keep their original hemline, it's got that sort of like you said, thicker part at the bottom. It's kind of a thing where it's you keep the original last part of that hem and it looks like you've never altered the jean at all. Versus if you cut that off and you fold it up, that's not really how the jean is like supposed to look, right?
So I actually do. My preferred method is to cut them off
Mhm.
and get matching thread. And so in my Juki, I can actually make it
Oh,
look
you make a whole
like they
new
were,
jean.
yeah.
Gotcha.
Yes. So then, but from if you're using a home machine,
Mhm.
I 100% understand why
Yeah,
it's much more challenging to make it look like an actual
I
manufactured
think so,
hem.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that industrial machine can do so much more, has so much more
It
power.
just, it has the power.
Yeah, yeah, sure, it sure does. I don't know if you've ever watched, back I don't know if that show is even still on anymore, but it's a PBS show. Angela Wolf would always do sort of like some alteration segments, and I loved those. Absolutely loved it. It was just because that stuff is not out there really very much, and which is good that you're doing your YouTube channel. Um,
Yeah, it's work in progress.
yeah,
I'm
but
learning as I
it's
go.
great, because, uh, in the last couple years, I've had to do alterations to, like, some linen pants that I've bought because they make ready-made makes linen pants so big, and the
Okay.
rise and the crotch goes so low. And I'm like, "This looks terrible." So I scoured YouTube to try to find how you do that. How do you adjust the rise? And there's several videos out there, but there was only the one, Jennifer Stern, who actually did make sense, and it looked a bit more, yeah, because these other
Mm-hmm.
ones were just, like, crazy, and you end up with, like, lopsided sides and stuff like that, but, yeah, I mean, the alterations, I think, is a scary topic, and a lot of people just don't even try it. And yet now, I mean, alterations are very expensive, especially at the department stores because they tend to charge, I guess, a lot more for whatever reason, but they do, or at least Nordstrom does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we, you would laugh because I totally live in the country. Meaning, like, the closest any like mall ish that's a real decent mall would be an hour plus drive in either
Oh,
direction.
wow.
So, like, there's not really departments. There's Kohl's. There's a
That's like
Kohl's.
my
There's a
sister. She
Walmart.
lives in Iowa, and their
Yeah.
nearest, like you just said with the mall, is an hour away from them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, so, yeah, it would be helpful to know how to alter things.
Yeah. So there aren't really
Mhm.
stores locally that are altering
Oh, I see.
within the store.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and some of that is that it's hard to find people who want to even do
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
So, well,
Yeah.
all right. So we can start by hemming, and I think another area is taking in a waist. Um,
And I say, so there's like sleeveless tops are an easier place to start because you're not having to work with a sleeve. So if it's hanging too low, if if the arm size is hanging too low, so like if you're trying to adjust from the shoulder seam, that's an alteration that's not super complex. So again, it's if it's not a lined item, then it's easier to adjust. I often have got people that say you have a shirt and it's maybe you do have broader shoulders but you're narrower further down, and especially like ready made these days, often there's not a lot of seams. So it's you can take the side seam down, and learning how to do that on a knit item is you just practice. But again, if you're really, really nervous about it,
mhm,
like you could always buy an item at Goodwill
mhm,
and just mess around with it a little bit and not worry about it.
mhm. That's a good idea, and some of them are just sort of common sense where, like, for instance, a T-shirt that looks too boxy, I
Hmm.
mean, you can just simply, start at the bottom hem and sort of, like, draw mark on there a little bit of a curve up to the armhole, right? I mean, that's a pretty simple stitch to try out,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it makes a big difference, so I think,
it makes
you're
a
right.
huge difference.
So people
Yeah,
should just kind of, like, throw their fear out the window and either
they
practice
do.
on their own clothes. And I can tell you, though, for me, when I get a successful alterations, I get so excited and so, like, proud of
Yes,
myself,
yes,
and I want to wear that clothing then. I just 'cause,
yes,
sometimes
yes.
when I just, don't get around to doing the alteration, then I don't wear it, and that's a waste. So are there, alterations that maybe should be avoided? So, like, if we're going shopping and, we really love this one piece, but maybe it's not in our exact size, should they go bigger? Probably, not smaller.
Yes, yeah. For for the most part, I don't recommend buying something that's too small. I mean,
Mhm,
I can tell you, so I just recently, well, it was like back in the spring, someone, they had this beautiful dress that they fell in love with. It came in a size too small for them, or it was, let me, if I can remember correctly. I think they were smaller in the waist, but they're bigger in the bust, and so it fit up until the waist, and then it would go. But it needed a lot of alterations because it was about 5 or 6 inches too long for them because they're very petite.
mhm.
So, in light of the fact that they loved the dress, I was like, well, we can put gussets in the side, like using the fabric that we're taking off the hem, we can put gussets in the side seams. And so it's possible, and it turned out beautifully, but that is like a much higher complication of,
Mm-hmm.
well, and again, I should also phrase that like this had like 3 or 4 layers of fabric because it was like a sheer and then there was like an illusion underneath it.
Mm-hmm.
So meaning like judge the alteration you're tackling by those type of things. Like don't do that for your first project. Start with alterations that are like one layer. Like cut out the like lined pants, the lined dresses and that stuff initially. You'll get there.
The thread. So is
Oh,
poly thread? I hear is better and stronger for garment construction. Is that kind of what you go by?
so that was an interesting question in terms of like, so I quilted a little bit as a kid, but I haven't really done a lot lately and years. I have gotten like the Gutermann poly thread like the whole time I've been in alterations. And so I would say like that's my personal preference.
Mm-hmm.
If you're getting like a cotton thread, it could shrink. But I also order from like Wowalk.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you've heard. Yeah.
Yeah, I do too. Mm-hmm.
And so they have all the variety of like kinds and sizes, but I will get the Gutermann
Mm-hmm.
poly for almost all my
I like
projects
Gutermann. Yeah.
except for slip covers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the various weights. So even like we were talking about like jeans, hemming
Mm-hmm.
jeans, like making your own hem. So getting that like top stitching weight,
Mm-hmm.
Gutermann poly
Yeah.
actually looks very similar to what is in the store or you know, like the jeans, and you can match the different yellows
Mm-hmm.
and browns to the jean hem.
Yeah, last year
Yeah.
I got I think it is Gutermann, and they had like a 5-pack of threads from the gold, couple of gold colors into like the
Mm-hmm.
blue, into the
Mm-hmm.
darkest. And it's been I very useful. I found a lot of uses
Yes.
for that thread, and you're right, it really does um up the look of what you're
Yes.
sewing a
Yes.
lot. So yeah, that thread makes a big difference. And other notions that are good for alterations, do you have any suggestions? Like
Lots of
like
seam rippers.
type of rulers or oh, seam rippers.
um,
Yeah, you do have to become comfortable with the seam ripper. That is so true. Mhm.
um, right, definitely. I have like a gazillion measuring things. Like I just have like tape measures everywhere. I have a lot of 6-inch rulers. I have like a 12-inch rulers.
Let's talk about that 6-inch ruler because
Yes.
I see a lot of alteration people using that, especially for just like measuring where to mark the hem of a pant. I was fascinated because I was watching this one measure that with just that little 6-inch ruler, and I'm like, why didn't I ever think of that? Went out and got myself a little metal 6-inch ruler.
Yes. Yes.
Because it's
Yeah, because
rigid, and you kinda need that. Yeah.
yes. And it's so easy to hold.
Mhm,
It's funny talking about 6-inch rulers. I have a good handful. So I have a couple that have the slider.
mhm,
And then I have a couple metal ones, and one of the metal ones, it's more like has the grooves in it
mhm.
rather than like the black lines.
Okay.
And what I realized is like I don't love that one as much because the one that has like that's the metal one with the black
Mhm.
markings, it's just so much easier to see.
Yeah.
And so it like you become aware of like, oh, this is like wasting wasting my time because I'm like spending too much time figuring out what it's at. Like and just the whole like it's not hard to read the one with the grooves in it, but
Mhm,
it's just like when it's with the black on the metal, you can see it. And then I have a clear one that is very similar, like that same kind of like it's just there's this delay in my cognitive thinking of like, well, what's that saying to me? For some reason,
Yeah,
when it's like the clear colors and then, but when you just have like the metal ruler with the black writing on it,
right.
for some reason that seems to be
Seems to stand
just,
out a little bit from
yeah,
the
yeah,
silver of the metal. Okay, so let's move on to sustainable clothing because you do a lot of that, and I saw a video of yours. I think it might be on your blog. You have a blog on your website, and you were
yeah.
replacing a yoke on a shirt and overlaying
Okay.
lace on it,
Yeah.
and it was really
Yes.
pretty, and it didn't seem like it took you very
Yes.
long.
No, it didn't. I guess I've always been more of like the sustainable sewer in terms of like repairing things.
Mhm.
But then it was as I was getting into starting to teach it that I was almost like, well, why would people want to learn how to sew? And I realized like, because like often do people want to learn just to craft and have a hobby, or do you want to learn because like we're all becoming more interested in like being sustainable. And I think, the whole idea of like pulling a little bit away from like the consumer mentality that
Mhm.
I think we probably all have like been influenced by to some extent. We started recognizing how much sewing is related to like the sustainable aspect, because if you can't sew, people are just throwing things away
Yeah.
as soon as they're broken,
Mhm.
as soon as like
Or
one little thing
or one
goes
little
wrong.
stain.
Yes, yes, that
Yeah.
too. And so recognizing that like sewing opens a whole new world, and whether it's even the button on the pair of pants
Mhm.
that you can't wear, or the pants that are too long and so you're not wearing them, or
Mhm.
you lost weight and so they're 2 inches to, all of these things. So that particular shirt, the yoke was worn. And I was like, I don't want to throw this shirt. So trying to think creatively, well, what can we
Mhm.
do with them? And I mean, it sounds kind of funny when I actually say it, but I'm like, to some extent, you can get inspired by fast fashion, meaning, well, like the whole idea of lace, just I seem to see it cropping up
Mm.
within like ready-mades
Mhm.
very often lately. And it is pretty. It's like a cute
Yeah.
look. And so this was like an old tablecloth that who knows, it's like a little piece of lace that I've had hanging around forever.
Mhm.
And I thought, oh, well, that would be perfect. And again, you seam rip, of course.
Yes.
You had to seam rip around most of the yoke. I just stitched it back on, and then you put it back together exactly the way
It
that it
was.
came
Yeah.
apart. Um, as far as actual time, I would say like you could budget like an hour for that project, I would think, especially
Mhm.
like would be a decent amount of time.
Mm.
And I always find that to be, in terms of alterations, very satisfying compared to like if you've been making your clothes from
Mhm.
scratch, you know how many hours worth of work
Oh,
usually goes
yeah.
into
Yeah.
that. But if you can like kind of revamp something in
Mhm.
an hour, you feel like accomplished and
Sure.
like, oh, now I can wear this again.
Mhm. Yeah, it's just such a good thing to learn and, to get more confident. Every time I do something, it just boosts my confidence a little bit more, and then also, for instance, like, hemming pants, I've been just doing so much because my husband, oh, he loves to put stuff in this mending pile, like, "Oh, got another mend for you to do, got another mend, zip, zip." He just thinks I could zip a zip, and, so, yeah. But you get faster and more adept
Yeah,
at
you
it,
do.
and
Mm-hmm.
for me, I have gotten a bit more adventurous, like, I would never
Mm-hmm.
have tried to tackle that, um, shortening the rise on the linen pants before, but since I've been doing a lot of mending and hemming, I just decided
Yes.
to do it because, um, I didn't wanna I didn't
Yeah.
wanna take it back with the whole trip back to the the store because
Yeah.
this one particular store, it doesn't matter. I've gotten there when it first opened, and there's always, like, these long lines, uh, to take stuff
Oh,
back.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
then, I'm always like,
Yes.
"Well, in the time and the gas that I spend, that I save."
Yes. I mean, So just to put this out there, as far as the rise,
Hmm.
so often especially when I was learning, what I would do with alterations is before cutting
Hmm.
all the fabric, like after you've done the alteration, before cutting all the fabric off, you
Hmm.
kind of test it.
Hmm.
So, I mean, I'm assuming for shortening the rise, you went up through the inseam of the
Yes.
crotch.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
you kind of like I
Yep.
pinched how much needed to come up, and then
Yeah.
I doubled that, of course, because of the fold, and then you put that down by the
Yep.
seam of the crotch and start your mark from there, and then you just taper it down
Mhm.
to the side seam of the leg.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it's really not that hard once you kind of work through the process of it, but at first I'm
Yes.
like, "Oh my gosh, I don't know how
Yes.
to."
Yes.
But you're right,
So,
and then I would try them on before you cut the fabric.
mhm,
And I was so conservative the first time I did this, I had to do it
exactly. That's what,
3
yep.
times!
But you probably each time saw a little bit of progress.
Yes, yeah. Yep,
Yeah.
mhm,
But I also think, and it depends on how people's brains work, but for me, as I was like getting into alterations, I had such a good background of pattern sewing
mhm,
that if I could begin to like mentally visualize, like you get a pattern and you open it and it's graded.
mm,
So you can see where, like, so if the if the rise seam is too long, imagine where the rise crotch line would be on the
the pattern
pair that was
piece.
graded smaller than the size that you were
Oh,
on.
gotcha.
And you know that it's up a little
Yeah,
higher. And so if you think through, oh, how would it, oh, there's like, this is what I would do to get that there.
okay, yeah,
So I feel like that those like visuals, if we start to
uh-huh,
like connect the dots between pattern making and alterations, like it's still clothing, you're still working with like the
uh-huh,
same kind of lines.
right.
And it's the same basic principles, but it's just almost like in reverse motion.
Yes. Yeah. But
Yeah.
you have to get your brain to train to
Yeah.
think that
Yes.
way.
Yes.
It does tend to sort of become fun and a challenge,
Oh,
the more I do it. So and it really has become a more mainstream, thing to do now. It's gotten popularity
mhm.
because
Yes.
of
Yes.
people wanting to be more sustainable
Hmm.
and not wasteful with clothing.
Yes. Yes.
And also, just the quality of ready made has really gone down so much.
Yeah.
Especially, I think, just since the pandemic. It's just that, companies just have to do what they can, I guess, to stay in business, but they start taking short.
Yes.
Well, and also, for instance, like we don't notice at the grocery store that they've made the cereal boxes smaller. We notice.
Right. Um,
So
yeah,
everybody's doing it in all industries.
they are. Yeah, I don't know if you read any of there's like Overdressed is one of the fashionopolis, some of those.
Mhm.
But one of them, and these were written well before the pandemic, but was talking about how even the stitch length, they were lengthening the stitch length of the factories for speed.
Mm,
Um, and the interesting point that some of those were bringing out is that it's also like our and then it's our fault, but it's not our fault. Like
yeah.
our consumer mentality of like,
Mhm.
oh well, I can just buy new, and it's almost like it is kind of like sickening when I almost actually think, well, you could buy a piece of clothing for like $5 or $10 at like Walmart,
Mhm.
and yet yes, I could repair something, but like when you think about somebody's making that and there's this fabric that's being made for so cheaply that it's not going to last, and
Mhm.
like how many clothes do we need, and there's just so much there. And I find myself, even as like I sew more and become even more conscientious in that, like thinking, wait, do I, even when I'm thrifting, well, what do I want to buy?
Mhm.
Do I need this? Like,
Mhm.
because we can all like that feeling of like, I think we were trained to like, oh, just let me just go get a new
Mhm.
outfit. Or like, it's, if you think of the outfit in terms of money rather than in terms of waste.
Mhm.
And so, like, oh, it's only like $10. I can afford
Mm.
that right now. Rather than,
Mhm.
wait a second, like, what am I doing? Like, to buy
Yeah.
something I don't really need, or, those things. And not to
Yeah.
say you never buy anything, but you know what I mean.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just, the fabrics, um, I
Yes.
are just not, I don't know, I just think that even just, like, 15 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
the the stores were still making things with, like, you had cotton t-shirts, not like the synthetic stuff, and
Yes.
you
Yeah.
know wool suits, and you hardly see wool out there anymore.
Right. Right.
So yeah, it's just become very disposable, and to me even like undesirable fabrics. But unless you sew, and unless you have time to sew,
Yes.
this is what people are stuck with, which is kind of sad.
Yeah.
But I think that my mindset too, because I used to, have a lot more in my closet just because changing the seasons, and you want something new and fresh. But I really kind of have consciously made it smaller. I've started making some pieces, and
Yeah.
investing in more expensive, better quality pieces,
Yes.
less like,
Yes.
put your money towards one piece like
Mm-hmm.
that, that will last you and is made from a better
Yes.
fiber. Um,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
I feel like that's more the way to go than
It is.
this
Yeah.
I like this one store that I still sort of sometimes go there, but not as much anymore because after the pandemic, their idea of saving money was to make everything cropped. And that does not work on every body type. And I was looking at the reviews, and people are saying, "What is going on with all this crop stuff? This is crazy. This doesn't look good." And
That's
I'm like,
hysterical.
that is them cutting corners and using less fabric. You know what I mean? So they thought,
Yeah.
"Oh, we're just going to start this trend again with all everything
Yes.
cropped, like
Yes.
cardigans, t-shirt, like
Yeah.
everything
Oh,
cropped." It was crazy. Yeah.
yes.
But I
Oh
just
my,
had to laugh.
that's so. I had to laugh too because one of my friends has teenage daughter, and she was like, oh yeah, we went back to school shopping. She goes like, but every shirt was a crop top. And I'm like, well, I don't really want you, and so it just made me think of that,
Yeah.
because just the other day, and I wasn't thinking of it in terms of like they're saving money on the fabric. I was just like, oh, I guess that's a new teenage trend, but that makes total
No, that was the
sense.
first thing I thought of because this wasn't for teenagers. I could see how if it was for
Yeah,
teenagers, you would think that's
yeah.
a trend, but no, not for like, grown
Oh
plus
my
size women.
gosh,
It was very ridiculous. So yeah. It's just kind of
too
funny
funny.
to try to figure out sometimes these manufacturers and stores and their little tricks to trick the consumer. Okay. So we're almost done here. I just want to talk a little bit about your custom fitted slip covers and your process with customers. Explain, like, do you go out to measure and then you make them based off of your measurements?
Um, no.
What?
So typically my process is that they'll be like, they'll contact me and say they want a slipcover made, and I'm like, okay. So then I actually have forms on my website where I'll be like, okay, can you go to this form, fill it out, because then you can have all, I just have your information down, and like it gives me the basics of like, how many cushions there are, a picture of it, and then I'll be able to tell them how much yardage to get of fabric, because my clients are responsible to get their own fabric. Like I might
Oh,
refer
wow.
them to sources,
Okay.
but I also give them like a guide to like if they're doing like what weight they might want
Hmm.
now that, and they're welcome to go other places, but like I tend to steer them away from velvets. I know
Oh
that
yeah.
there are a couple people that like to, like, there's some thinner velvet that I've seen one person on Instagram do
Hmm.
an amazing job slip covering, but I clients don't always have the best taste in velvet.
Hmm.
And way at the beginning, I had some people bring me like a fatter velvet, and it's a lot more challenging to work with. You
Like
know,
a velvet for
the
Christmas stockings and not home deck.
yeah, and even so, when you're working with slip covers, if you're thinking on the scale of home deck fabrics and the weight of the fabric, you don't want the heaviest weight. So it might be fine for upholstery, but when you think about a slip cover, when you're at the seams, especially if you're choosing to have welting, which I would say not all of them do. It actually has kind of faded in and out a couple of times of like, but I would say probably at least 70% have welting. So by the time you're adding that into a seam, if you would have about four thicknesses of, and so if you're doing a heavy weight upholstery fabric, it just doesn't lay well as a slip cover. And so the medium to lighter weights, and of course you don't want too light or else it's not going to withstand the test of time. But yes, making sure that your fabric is an appropriate weight for a slip cover.
The weight of the fabric, it's not like they're buying just 2 yards. They're buying like 7 to 15 yards of this fabric, so and it really
Yeah,
can't be returned, unless it's not been cut or anything, you know what I mean? It's harder to return
right.
stuff
Oh,
like that. So
yeah.
they've gotta there's so much more involved with it because there's directional
Yes.
patterns and
Yes.
all of that
Yes.
stuff that you have to contend with. So, but I think that your form and being as detailed as you are really kind of helps to mitigate any sort of those types of issues, right?
Yes. Yeah, and I usually like if they're trying to go with a fabric that's, not the norm, like, can you send me pictures or whatnot? I mean, and I have some really interesting clients. In fact, I did one, I guess it was last year, for she was an interior designer kind of, and
Mhm.
she was making an Airbnb.
Mm,
So creating a whole new studio. And I want to say I might have done 4 to 5 pieces for that
mhm,
Airbnb. But the fabric she chose, you would not believe. One of the fabrics it reminded me of the Chinese New Year.
mm,
It was yellow background with dragons and lions and all sort, like,
mhm.
and not small
Mhm.
dragons. I'm talking like a 2 foot
Oh,
dragon.
wow. That's a big scale.
Yes. Yes. So then recognizing that, but like the weight of fabric she picked was perfect.
Mhm,
But when you're trying to place those on a slip cover, say it was the arm covers, you want it placed in such a way so that the dragon's facing up, the heads are in approximately the
right.
same position on either side. So there's all of these things to be cognizant of when you do have a very patterned or picturesque fabric compared to like if you're getting a plain
Yes,
neutral duck cloth.
which makes
Yeah.
very good slip covers, but the
Yes,
bigger
it
the
does.
repeat, the more fabric you're gonna need too.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah,
And like the more waste
it's much more waste.
is as well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So it's interesting. You must have I've seen pictures on your website and your slip covers are really fitted, so I'm surprised that you don't go out to measure yourself
Oh,
and
oh, I didn't finish. That's not the end of the story.
oh,
Sorry.
okay.
Oh, I do not. No. So then once the fabric, so then they get put on the waiting list. Once the
Mhm.
fabric's there, we have communication. Um, there's two options. Sometimes I will pin fit the whole entire cover there,
Mhm.
or um, a lot of times I'll bring the piece home, like we'll pick it up,
Oh, okay.
or I will make it from an old cover.
Mhm. As a template, yeah.
Yes. And then the other alternative, which I haven't done a lot of, but I actually did it for a good friend of mine recently, was she doesn't live locally at all, and I went to visit her. I took an old sheet,
Mhm.
and especially because I've done so many, I kind of know what markings I need to know. And so I literally like drew out, traced each piece of the
Mhm.
couch onto the sheet and cut it out and marked like where the intersections
Mhm.
were, and then brought it home and made a cover from that. So, but no, you like there's very, very exacting. It's you can't make it without having like either exact templates or
Right.
having the
That's what I was
piece. No,
thinking. Yeah.
it's very, but
Mhm.
I don't really, meaning I don't really go by measurement as far as just saying, oh, the back of this couch is 72 by
Mhm.
40. Like that's not good
Right.
enough for me.
No, because
Yeah,
the
so I
the
don't want to
pieces have
just measure the
shape and form.
dimensions.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, that's good. So, and I love the fitted looks so much better than the
Oh, yeah.
floppy, floppy. I mean,
Yes.
unless you're intentionally doing this shabby chic, which was popular like 25 years ago, it's not. It does look a little bit too sloppy for like a regular. If
Mm.
you're like, if this is even like even a little bit formal, where you're entertain or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but and some of those floppy ones too kind of look like it, but they're still semi-fitted, and that's why they look good. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. But I have done a lot of wing
Uh-huh.
chairs, and I love that. I mean, they have so much
They
character.
do. Yeah.
Like wing chairs have, and when they have a really nice slipcover on, like it's like the beauty of saving something from a different time period
Right.
almost,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
making it look, I don't know, modern enough or fitting your
Mhm.
style, but um to have those pieces is just, I mean,
Yeah.
gorgeous. So
Agree.
I
Yeah. I always advocate for saving upholstery and just
mm,
reupholstering it, or making a slipcover would also save it as well, because it will be the insides of it will be so much better quality from back
mm-hmm,
then than it has been the past 20 years. I mean, just, starting in like the early 2000s is when things started to be made overseas, and
mm-hmm,
with different techniques, and not like the whole, I don't know, like
mm-hmm.
mortise tenon dowelly, that kind of craftsmanship.
Yeah,
So yeah, if all those old pieces of furniture are like treasures, I think.
they
And
are.
to get them
They
made new to that kind of quality is so expensive. It's just, only you have to have
Yes,
it in order to
yes,
make it new. Yeah.
yeah.
So, all right, the last thing we'll talk about is the classes you offer, because you kind of have a nice variety on your website where there's a few of them, and when you click on them, it takes them to Udemy. Is that how you say it?
Okay, yeah, yeah,
And there's others that are
uh,
you have PDF downloads, and then
yeah,
now you're doing tutorials on your YouTube. So go ahead and talk about that.
yes. Yeah, so that's definitely a work in progress, meaning figuring out what people want to know and what format they want to know it in, and just where they're at. So people have been asking me to teach for eons, maybe about 10 years. And it wasn't the time and season of my life. I think I just was busy. I had little
Mhm.
kids, like little, like babies at the time. And I was like, I don't have the bandwidth for it. And so then I started teaching and just, figure out, well, because where do you start with people's knowledge? And so I'm just trying to build that up a little bit. Like some of the ones on Udemy are very, very
Mhm.
basic. So I was trying to have like a platform to like build off of. And so I hope to be able to build, begin to like build them
Mhm.
more because I do enjoy, teaching different techniques or different, because people want it, right? You want to know
Yeah.
and making it as useful as possible and as easy to follow.
Yes.
And I also think, some people are more visual and some people are, like they like to just have a printed page and follow a book more than
Mhm.
having to sit and watch a video.
Right.
So that was an option. And then like in person, so I've been teaching at a local shop here, and sadly it's actually going to be closing this fall.
Oh.
So yeah, which is sad. And you go, the next store will open. So I have some private students,
Mhm.
and I'm always open to taking more as time permits. But I definitely think that locally, people know that I offer it, but there is not a super huge, I don't know if I
Demand.
shouldn't say that, a super huge
Mhm.
demand, or it's like a time
Mm.
thing. Um, Trying to figure out, well, what they would want to learn and in what order. Because it is interesting, what I found is for classes locally, it's often that more from a hobbyist mentality, like,
Mhm.
and not anything wrong with that, but like a group of ladies want to come and they want to learn how to make a cute pocketbook
Mm.
or something like that,
Mhm.
which I could teach, but I'm not super into
Yeah.
into that. So
Mhm.
I'm kind of like, well, if
Mhm.
it's not meant to be, that's okay.
Mhm.
But then for kids classes, which is a lot of what I was teaching at this shop that's going to be closing, is I felt like it was such a strong basis of my own upbringing was to learn from patterns. And so, to be able to instill that in my students because their parents don't really
Mhm.
sew. So here they are learning to use a sewing machine. And so all the classes that I did, we did use a
Mhm.
pattern, but I was trying to instill in them, like, well, how can you change it? So, like, one of them was like the very first pattern was like pajama pants, and it came without pockets, the pattern. So, how can we change this? So, starting to just, I wanted them to think outside the
Mhm.
box. I don't want you to think like it has to be the way this pattern is. Like, this is the premise of it. And this is, as we were talking about the alterations, like, this is what line in the garment changes if you need to change the crotch seam, and kind of
Mhm.
helping them develop a little bit more of an understanding of that and to see that clothing, both patterns and ready made, don't have to be a certain, like, you have the ability to do something about it when you can sew. So that's been a lot of fun,
I think that's
is
fantastic.
teaching them.
Yes. That's
Yeah.
so valuable. I mean, that's, I feel like that is exactly what, we need. That style, I love that style of teaching because it's, it's just not out there, it's
Hmm.
unique, and,
Oh,
uh to especially with the younger ones, I mean, to get them to, it's such good training for them, and to be able to
mm,
think outside the box, because, I mean, I know when I was sewing back in the day, I really thought that I had to follow each step of the pattern, and I
yes.
never
Yes.
imagined that I could go off course and add a pocket
Yes.
or take,
Yes.
a sleeve from one pattern and use it with another, or
Mm,
I learned all
yes.
of that, like, in adulthood after YouTube was out there. So I it's such a
Yes.
valuable thing, I think, to teach kids and even adults of that
Yes.
type of learning. I love it. Um, and also what you had mentioned earlier about like the in person and then some people like trying to figure out their schedules and times and um, I uh, I love online classes because I've said this many times on
Mhm.
my podcast, but I feel like I get a front row seat and a very good
Yes.
view of what the instructor is doing. So I love that kind of a platform. And I think just our society in general are so online right now. I mean, it's just that's how
Yes.
people shop, that's how people learn, and I mean, you can get a whole university degree online. So why not learn how to sew online too?
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
so that's great. Well, it has been so much fun chatting with you and learning all about this whole world of different type of sewing, mending, alterations, and sustainable sewing
Yes.
and even sustainable mindset of purchasing clothing and maybe altering it to fit you better. So thank you for taking the time to share all of that with us. And
Yes.
before we go, I just want to mention that you offer well, we just talked about a variety of downloads, tutorials for clothing alterations and repairs, and you're giving us a link for 25%
Yes.
off, which is so generous. Thank you. And the promo code is all one word, make and decorate. So they can go to your website and purchase PDF download and use that code for the 25%
Yes.
off.
Yeah.
And all of the links to your website, which is naomifata.net. Yes, right?
Yes. Yes.
naomifata.net. And the links will be in there for your website, your Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube channel.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you so
Yes,
much.
it was just so much fun. So thanks, and we'll chat again. If you love the Make and Decorate with Stephanie podcast, check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/make and decorate. You'll get a bonus episode every month, even during the months that the show is on hiatus. Thanks for listening, and I will chat with you next time. Bye-bye.